to the summit, and I'm ecstatic to welcome my next guest. Ruby Newell-Legner is, well, let's just face it, she's done everything that a professional speaker would ever hope to want to do. I joke that she's forgotten more about speaking than I probably will ever know. But more than that, she's been the president of the National Speakers Association, which means, truthfully, it's almost a full-time job in its own, and you have to absolutely love helping emerging speakers to do that. And she's been part of the Global Speakers Federation. She's also worked with 67 professional sports players, as well as, I mean, she's spoken in 25 countries. I mean, a lot of people would like, do they even run 25 events in 25 countries? So she has done it all, and she has had some long-term clients that have worked with her for decades. And I think that a lot of emerging speakers are hoping to get their first gig, but those people that really stay in the speaking industry, they have clients for a long time. Otherwise, they can't make money long term. It's all about maintaining those repeat relationships. So, Ruby, I'm so excited we get to do this. Thank you for joining me.
And I'm just as honored to be on with you today.
Now, I kind of pre-warned you about this audience, right? A lot of people here are emerging speakers. And I remember you saying when we talked about that whenever I speak to an emerging speaker, I ask them what are their top 5 questions. And the reason why you do that is because otherwise they just ask you how they can be successful as a professional speaker. And that's such a broad topic. Or how do I get into speaking? So I've followed your rules, and I've thought about the top 5 things I want to ask you. But I actually think before we get into that, it might be helpful for people to know how you actually got into the speaking space, because I think a lot of people, they kind of think, you know, I've spoken at a few conferences for my organization, and now I'd like to be a professional speaker. And so I'm just going to put up a website, and next thing you know, I'll get a few phone calls, I'll charge money, and next thing I know, I'll be a professional
DPP,
speaker.
yeah.
There's a lot more to it than that, right? And I think that your story really depicts how much there can be to that. So I think it'd be really helpful to share kind of how you got into the speaking world.
It was a rather unorthodox way. I was a swim coach. I coached swimming for 20 years. I was a competitive swimmer for 17 years before that. Loved coaching, actually went to college to be a swim coach, and absolutely loved what I did. And I developed a hyperallergic reaction to the pool air. And I had a major sinus condition, major headaches, and sinus infections after sinus infections. Went to 7 doctors, and finally a doctor identified what was wrong. And she says, "You have hypersensitive pneumonitis." I said, "Okay, so what do we do about it?" She says, "You're allergic to it." And I said, "Okay, allergy shots or medicine, what do I do?" And she says, "Well, you have to quit your job." I says, "I don't think you understand. I'm a swim coach. That's what I do. That's what my whole life has been, around that." And she says, "Well, you just have to quit." I said, "No, I don't think you understand. I got married between junior national swimming championships and senior national swimming championships. My husband lifted the veil, and he thought I'd be holding the clipboard and the stopwatch. This is my life." And she says, "Well, if you want to get well, you're going to have to quit." So I took a season off, and I got well, and I was like, wow, I guess I'm well now. I'll go back. And I tried another season and got sick again. So it was inevitable. I had to quit. So I started, I moved from my aquatics job over to facility management, and I started taking all these classes to be a better trainer, and I really liked it. And then I started, volunteering to do other training for other departments, and I really liked it. And then I thought, well, I'm just going to volunteer to do other programs for other agencies, and 200 free engagements. And then somebody said, "So how much do you charge?" And I went, "You can make money doing this? What a concept." And so from then it started. I started taking more classes, and it was kind of one of those things that found me instead of me finding it. So that's how I started.
I think it's an important thing, because a lot of people think that the best way to get into speaking is to commit, right? Quit your job, start speaking, and really spend the time to practice the craft of speaking, but also, to run the business and really hustle. And I think in today's entrepreneurship world, everyone kind of starts to say, you've just got to take that risk and jump. And I think your story really depicts that maybe that's not the right path, because you wouldn't have even had the opportunity to practice 200 times, right? If you weren't still employed.
And that's the first thing I tell people: don't quit your day job, because you have to I had to learn how to breathe. I couldn't breathe up there. You're scared, and you may know your content really well, but it's a whole different thing to get up in front of an audience and to breathe and know how to deliver your content, no matter how smart you are and how much you know what you want to teach. So once you learn how to do that, it makes a whole difference. And they'll pay you more when you know how to deliver it and you are an expert and you can deliver it in a way that people want to learn the material. So that was very helpful for me that I had the opportunity. My agency actually then liked what I was doing so much. They transferred me from facility management into being the inside trainer. So they hired me to do that. So that helped me again. So once again, I tell people, don't quit your day job until you know that you have lined up clients, and use your time find a way to either volunteer or to use your vacation and your time off. That's what I did to get that practice.
I think that's really valuable for people to hear because, I mean, I was unfortunate in the fact, well, fortunate or unfortunate, I'm not quite sure what to say, but because I'd always worked for myself, when I decided to become a speaker, I had to find places to speak, and there's a lot of hardship to that. And I remember trying to get my first speech, and I did speak for free. And the truth was, I always thought I was that person that was going to speak for free to get clients, because that's really what I was trying to do. And I remember paying a videography team to come and record me speak at my first speech. And I mean, the stage, I don't know if you'll be able to see this in the camera, but it was only about twice this size. And I must have bounced off that stage. Like, I've never shown anyone the video because I don't stand still. And it doesn't seem, then my arms are moving like a ton. And I feel that if I had have charged somebody for that, I would have had, I probably should have given them a refund, especially if I charged them a lot. I did that one for me. But when you're working in an organization, it's far more about the content, but you can learn the craft. But how long was that period to do the 200 speeches?
Probably about a year. Because I worked every weekend, every evening that I could. I worked really hard to do those free engagements. And some of them were in-house that I was able to work for other departments too. So maybe a year and a half.
See, that's really interesting because I feel like a lot of people, like, to be able to find 200 places to speak if they weren't working in an organization where they could find opportunities, that would have taken a lot longer. And like, I've seen you speak from stage, and no one would say you don't find time to breathe. Like, you had an absolute command of the stage. When you got to 200, do you feel like you had it then, or do you feel like what was the trajectory if you look over the years? Like, because I mean, we were talking offline about the fact that I always thought I had great content, but up until a period of time, I never considered myself anything more than a good speaker. And then during COVID, I changed. If you're thinking from a speaker perspective, like, do you see that there were like levels that you went through as you kind of learned along the way?
Oh, well, the ego takes you, you have to have enough ego to get up in front of the group. And then there's all those evaluations you get that take you back down. Yeah. And I remember going to my first National Speakers Association national conference. And I'd been in the association about 5 years, and you learn so much there. But I went to my first national conference. I was pretty confident. And, I thought maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, I was probably a 7. I was pretty, full of myself. And I went there and I watched the first speaker go up there, and I had an awakening that I was probably a 7, but the scale went to like 16. And it was like, oh, that's a speaker. I've got a lot to learn, and over the years, I've just, the beautiful thing about the National Speakers Association is you see speakers that, oh, that's wow. You have no idea how people can, engage the audience and just leave you mesmerized. And so you think you're good, and then you see something like that and you're like, note to self, I need to work on this. So, all the way through your career, you'll see somebody and you'll go, you never steal their stories, but you study them and you study their presence and how they tell a story and how they pause and how they just tell a point, and they bring a story and then they bring it into the audience, and it's just amazing. And you just study the craft, and then you go home and you go, how can I do that with this story that I tell or this concept that I'm working on? And oh, it's just truly amazing. It's always something you're working on every speech you give. So it's a fascinating, industry that we are in, and it's always you're always trying to make it better. So I love studying it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that though, because I feel like a lot of people study in isolation, or they join something like the National Speakers Association or the Global Speakers Federation, but then they don't actually suck everything out of it that they possibly could. And I think that, you could definitely speak to the fact that you have. But even my involvement in the National Speakers Association has been an interesting one. But the fact is that I thought when I first went up, and it's funny, when I teach networking, I teach sales, I'm like, never make it about you, right? If the first thing that comes out of your mouth is you've lost the sale, and then when I went and spoke on stage, the first thing I did is I talked about myself, because in my head, I'm like, they've got to see that I'm credible before. And I remember Tom Singer walking up to me afterwards, after he came and saw me speak, and he's like, Matt, you've got some amazing content. Like you've got a track record that, I may never have. But I hated you in the first 15 minutes because all I heard was I, and I never heard me at all. And then I met Jim, and so I changed my whole presentation to put me later and threw me under the bus as opposed to built myself up. And then I met amazing people that gave me little other bits of advice along the way. But what I found is that it was a sole source of getting feedback that was critical, sometimes well received, sometimes not. But everybody was talking about the craft. And I don't feel like buying a program sometimes does that for you, like the national speakers, because they're paid to give you, or they're trying to push you to their program. They're not giving you just honest feedback. What's your experience been for those people that are or aren't part of a Global Speakers Association or Federation or the National Speakers Association?
Well, let me correct you if I can. So the Global Speakers Federation is a federation that takes care of and encourages other associations. So we don't have speakers. We don't help speakers. We help associations. So they can't join, just so you know. But we help all the 17 associations around the world. So we have 17 associations in other countries, and we help the leaders build a better association so they can join those associations, just so they know that. But it's a wonderful thing that we do for them. But there's lots of associations around the world, in case there's other people that are listening here that are not in the US. So talk to me about that, and I'll show you to an association that you can join, so that I can help them with. One of the things that is so helpful that you can find is there's masterminds in different groups. So, for instance, in the National Speakers Association, we have chapters, and chapters have a lot of different things. Some of them have academies, and some of them have mastermind groups that are helping, or you get together at the meetings and you say, let's start a mastermind. And masterminds are small groups of people who have a very close-knit group, and they decide that, we're going to have a meeting maybe once a month or quarterly or however you decide, and we're going to feed each other with information. We're going to get feedback from each other. Every mastermind's a little different. I've been in, I think, 6 in my lifetime, and they have changed my life in so many ways, because I will bring a problem to them that I'm having. I need new marketing material. He'll look at this, and they are blunt, they're kind, but they will tell me exactly what they think, and they'll give me feedback. And my job is to say, thank you. And it's the hardest thing, because you want to go, but I was thinking about, no, thank you, because they mean well, and they are sharing their opinion, and they're professional speakers. So I should listen. I shouldn't argue with them. And I take it back and I think about it. I don't argue, because they mean well, and I should take it in. And then I implement what I think is important. And, 9 times out of 10 it is. It's hard to take sometimes, but it always is good when I'm not so sensitive about it, but sometimes it's hard. But I tell you, they always make me better. They give me food for thought, and maybe it's a speech or a story I'm working on, but oh, that is so helpful for me. Maybe it's a new initiative I'm working on. And to have that kind of feedback from other people who are in some ways competitors, but we try to put masterminds together that aren't direct competitors. So I specialize in sports, leisure, and entertainment, and there aren't very many people that do that. So I surround myself with people who aren't competitors. They are other niches, so they can help me. So that's another way we help each other.
That's interesting. I will say I have a couple of speakers that, well, actually, I should probably tell you. I mean, Mastermind, when I was in Austin, by the way, there were only a certain number of professional members, so it was one mastermind, but it was so valuable for me. And I will say, like, when you get into that meaty content and people are kind of humble enough to share what is broken in their business and what they're proud of that may also be broken in their business, that it gives you a really great opportunity. And I've really enjoyed those elements of feeling like you have camaraderie, because there's a lot of isolation in being a professional speaker and getting out of that, because everyone else thinks you're a celebrity if they've seen you speak. So you need a group of people that actually call you on your stuff and tell you that you can improve and truthfully tell you what's possible. Because I think that for me, when I first started, I was like, it'd be nice to speak to audiences of a couple of hundred people. I didn't think I'd be speaking to audiences of thousands. That wouldn't have even gone through my mind. This introverted kid, there was no way that I'd be speaking in front of thousands of people. So getting people to expand your mind, I think, is also really, really helpful. I want to transition into getting paid to speak, because somebody came up to you and said, hey, would you mind if I cut you a check to speak at an event? And I think a lot of speakers dream of that, but I'm assuming that right after that, the next person didn't, and you had to go through the process of going, well, that was nice, now what? So how did you go through the process of, firstly, coming up with the number that you were going to charge that person, and then secondly, how did you come up with did you then foster a plan to go out and get more gigs like that?
Well, another program for the chapter that I was involved in, they gave us an opportunity to get a mentor. And it was right at that phase where somebody had come up to me and said, what do you charge? And I'm like, $50? I don't know, honestly. And so about that time, I got my mentor and he said, so what are you charging? And I said, well, I got $50 one time. And then another time I got 275. It was like, whoa. And he goes, oh, Ruby. And I'm like, what? And he says, it's really important in our profession that we manage the rate we charge. And so I want you to practice with me. And this is not what I charge now, but this is what he told me. And we're really good about I'm not telling anybody what fees they should charge, but this is what he said. He says, I want you to practice with me. 900 a half day and 1,500 a full day. And I and I tried to say it, not 900 up. And I couldn't say it. He goes, I'm going to call you every morning and ask you what you charge. And he did for like 6 weeks. It was crazy. And I practiced saying it. And as soon as I could say it without laughing, he says, okay, now you're ready to say it out loud when someone asks you. And so every time I have bumped my fee up, and you do that all the time, I had to go through that process of confidently practicing to say it out loud. And it's the way you learn how to say it. But you don't start by just saying the fee. And that's the other thing I learned. You say, what have you paid speakers in the past? And then it gives you an idea of what the other person knows you're worth or not. Because sometimes they don't know, or sometimes they have hired other speakers and they'll start at a higher fee than you ever imagined. So you don't want to go low. And sometimes they don't know what to say to that. So you say, so what do you have budgeted for this? And so there are two questions that are really important to ask before you ever quote a fee. And the third thing that you should remember too is sometimes it's very helpful to have somebody in your team that is responsible for telling them the fee, because we're terrible at it. I'll just say whatever you have. We're softies. We want to do the job, and it's better to have somebody else. So I'll ask you, Matthew, how do you handle that question? Because it's a hard one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, there's a good example. I'll answer the question, but I just, as you were speaking, it occurred to me that a person that actually wrote the foreword for my first book on sales was a lady called Judy Robinette, and she wrote a book called How to Be a Power Connector, and it sold like wonderfully, and she kept getting all of these requests to speak, and they would ask her how much her speaking fee was, and these are people that reached out to her because they read her book. They were ambassadors, and so she would say $5,000, and then they wouldn't hire her, and she didn't understand why. And I said, Judy, it's because they don't think you're any good based on the fee, right? Like, she was quoting so low, and she's like, in her mind, it was only an hour. I'm like, no, it's a lifetime of experience that you're summarizing in an hour. So what I suggested that she said is, I suggested, because they saw her as a celebrity, to respond with, but before they get to asking about the fee, she would preempt saying, now, I know that when you reached out, you probably had an understanding of what working or having someone like me speak at your event would be. What idea of budget did you have in mind? And they would then say something like, oh, look, we know you're probably more expensive than this, but we just couldn't imagine, we just can't stretch much more than 30,000. And she would then have to do her best not to fall off her chair when they said that, and then, go about doing the deal. But then all of a sudden she got the deals. Now, I will say, Judy Robinette wrote an amazing book. She was a great speaker, and she knew she could deliver. And I feel like there's a duty of care here to say, don't do that and then not deliver, right? So I tend to focus on based on what I know I can deliver at the event and the quality of speaker that I am, what do I believe is fair? And that's a number that I keep in my head. And, plus or minus 25%, I know that that's considered fair. But what I will do is, a lot of times, and I have the luxury of getting a lot of speaking events that come to me. I actually have to keep in my mind that there is a corporate rate and a small business rate, because I have a lot of products that I sell to small business owners that I don't sell to corporations. And I love working with small business owners and maybe a little bit less corporations. So because of that, I build that into the pricing as well. Because when I speak into even though I never sell from stage, there's never been a time that I haven't been hired by multiple people when I've spoken at small business. So the commercials have to be the same. So what I will do is I will literally, when somebody asks me, and I actually would say I did take your advice. I had a person on my team, Terry, who literally would say the fee because I was like, oh, it's a lot of money at that point. And I felt like my ego was on the line. But I got to the point where I became comfortable. And, I would say, and my fee for that is, does that fit within your budget? And I would always say, does that fit within your budget? Because what I found is they would say yes, no, or maybe. And then I would then say, well, let's workshop that then, if they said anything but yes. And what I found is sometimes, and I actually got this advice from a member of NASA Austin, sometimes when they said maybe or no, I felt I could find out that they weren't far off, but they ran multiple events. Or I would find out that there were certain things they were willing to do. And what I created, and this was a great piece of advice I got from an NSA member, was I created almost like a Cheesecake Factory menu of what I was willing to discount if they gave me X. And things like testimonials, or are they going to record it because then I've got a great sizzle reel and things like that. And so, but I was always of the school, I will mention the price and then I will see how they react. And based on that, I would workshop. But I quite like your concept around kind of asking, and actually I think this is really critical for the people that are listening. Ruby has got an extensive career, and mine, I've done well in a very short period of time, but I'm still figuring a lot of things out. But I bet if you ask every speaker that question that's tenured or successful, they'll all answer it differently, because the answer is what's right for you. And so you need to try things on, you need to test things. And I think that is what is really important. And on that, how did you try and test finding gigs? Like, you've gone from, I'm speaking I've spoken at 200 events, not being paid. Now I've got $50, I'm a celebrity, to I'm going to go and get more gigs. And about that time you got the mentor. Was it something the mentor advised you to do that led to getting more gigs? Or was it something that you did yourself? Was it grit, hustle, a specific strategy? Help me understand what took you from free and always free to getting first gig to I now speak all over the world.
Well, keep in mind, when my mentor was telling me that, I was still working full time. And those gigs were with parks and recreation agencies who I did those budgets. I knew they didn't have any money. So that was a big jump, the 900 and 1500. So That was very comfortable for me, and I'm way beyond that now, but that was in their budget. And so it was a good pricing. So I started speaking for associations, and associations at that time were paying, and they knew I was an expert because I did those jobs. So when I this is back 30 years ago. Keep that in mind as I tell you these stories, because I'm going to mention the word fax, which some of those people in the audience won't even know what that is. But so I created a, a form that I would give out that they filled out that was an evaluation feedback form. And I called it that on purpose, but it's very much like Talkadot does now, only it's all digital, but it's exactly the same concept. And I would literally in the middle of my program, I would say, oh, and I would pull out a piece of paper and I would read them something that was longer than they could write down, but they would be foaming at the mouth. They wanted a copy of it. And as soon as somebody would say, can we get a copy of that? I would say, when you complete your evaluation and turn it in, and then I would pull up a pile of the papers, I will give you one of these. So when you turn in your evaluation in the back, I'll give you one of these. And everybody's like, where's my evaluation form? I got to fill one out. At the bottom of the evaluation form, do you want training? Check this box. Do you want on my newsletter? Check this box. And so I would get an evaluation. They would get their bonus handout. I did that for every program. And I quickly built up my database to 20,000 very quickly. And of course, I had a person who was a school teacher after school. She would come over and data entry all those. So, and that was from people all around the United States. So then when I was going to do training for one of them, I would pull up all the people in that zip code and say, hey, I'm going to be in your area. Do you want training? You could have my in-area rate. And so we would either fax them or email them if they had put their email addresses, but only the people who wanted training but couldn't afford me, they got the in-area rate. We did that for 15 years. And so in 1998, I did 204 programs using that method. And so it built up. I had 60 associations that I worked with, all in my niche. And it just built and built and built. And my fees went up and up and up. And then I started talking internationally. I went to an international conference in Orlando and got invited to go to Dubai, and had ended up with 19 clients there doing that same concept. And it just grew because that system works. And so now I use Talkadot, and it's all digital. It's so much easier. I don't have to pay somebody to input. I've got an Excel spreadsheet after I finish. So, thank God for technology.
I agree. I think technology's made our lives a lot easier. I even in the last few years, amazingly easier. But I don't want to take off the focus of what you said, that you gave them something that was valuable to them in their mind, and then said, if you want that, quickly just go and fill out a form and tick a box. And then the question, and I've seen this form because, by the way, I've been in your keynotes where you did that for the National Speakers Association, how we met, and you showed that piece of paper. And I remember walking home like this one document was gold, because it just asked questions about how were you as a speaker. And then there's this little tick box. It seems so innocuous at the bottom of the form.
Oh, and there's one more thing on it too. There's also a little section. So for instance, if they attended my supervisory skills for success, I put like 5 other programs that I do around that topic, and they checked it off. And then we also wrote a letter to whoever hired me for like an association. I said, and this is what they want me to do next year. So it was good for the client that they had from their attendees, the other sessions that they want me to do. So that association loved me because this was from their members. This is what they wanted. So it gave me presence the next year. So they love me for doing it. And sometimes they say, so isn't it kind of like a referral form? Oh no, it's a feedback form. and I'll give you the information when we finish.
Well, that's very valuable. I mean, I feel like a lot of people miss that because they come and say, oh, if you enjoyed that keynote, you'll enjoy this one. Well, let us take it to a committee and figure it out. Half your members have said they want me to deliver this. You asked, we answered, right? So I feel like what you've done is you've kind of removed the requirement of hard selling yourself to people because they've asked for it. And even if you were speaking for free, and I actually, just so you know, I had the same thing happen to me. Like, I used to speak for free to get clients. That was what I did. And I never sold from stage because I felt like that actually reduced the number of people that bought from you. I used to tell people not to buy. But what I found was somebody reached out to me and said, "Oh, we heard you speak at an event. We'd like to pay you to speak." And I'm like, "Well, that's better than speaking for free. I'll take it." But it was the same thing. It then that once that happened, and I then went, okay, if I can get paid to speak, then that will fuel my marketing budget. And I think that's an interesting thing for people to hear. I always talk about, like, if you're a person that speaks but you don't offer anything else, programs, coaching, right? And you can just speak, but you can offer programs on the back end. It's very hard to compete against other speakers that have all the programs and the things that they do, because they, like, for me, the speaking fee, while I get paid very well, I would have spoken for free. So I put that straight into my marketing budget, where everything else, what I do afterwards, is the thing that I take funds from to feed myself and to grow my business. Do you, as you go through the business of speaking, because one of the things that I think that you started to uncover throughout the document that you just highlighted was that you're treating your speaking business like a business. And a lot of people tend to treat it like I'm going to be a singer-songwriter, or, I guess even that should be a business, but a lot of them don't treat it that way. How do you go about thinking about that?
I treat it like a hobby. Yes, you do. It is a business. It's hard work, and you have to create a system. I always say if there's something you're going to do more than once, you create a system for it, and after you do it once, you look at it and you make it better the next time. And this whole business is a system. And if you work on it and you make it better and you slice and dice it. Another thing is, after every engagement, I have a sheet that I evaluate myself. What were the things that I did right? What were some of the key people? And I keep a log of that, and I put it in my database about the people. And so when somebody calls, and it happens all the time, I just got a call for 10 years ago. I did an engagement, and they call back. "It's time to have you back." And I'm like, "Is Mike still there?" He is, and he's so excited. Because I had it in my notes, and they love that. And I also have, the last time I spoke there, this is something that happened in this session, that the next time I did that session, I did it better because I remembered that I did this. So, you have to evaluate yourself, even though you may not like it, but that's how you get better.
How did these things occur to you? And I know you teach customer service to clients that have booked you for decades, but so maybe this stuff naturally occurred to you. But for those people that have got full-time jobs that haven't really thought about running their own business before, I mean, what you've really talked about is customer satisfaction surveys that lead to extra business, CRM systems that incorporate really personal details that don't even occur to a lot of salespeople to write down. Did this stuff just naturally occur to you, or did you have to think about, like, how did you go through the process of thinking about what systems you needed? And for those people that are listening, how would you suggest they do it and prioritize the right systems first?
Wow, that's a good one. Well, my mother was a restaurant manager, so I kind of grew up in that customer service world. The stories on the way to swim practice, I would hear all the stories from my mother that happened the day before. And I kind of got the brain for it. And then I'm a consumer. There are things that upset us, and there are things that are hero stories. So I really crank that up a little bit and pay attention. And so those are things that when I go in, the first thing I do for an organization is I secret shop. I just pay attention. And so when I meet with the people who want to hire me, or they're considering hiring me, I just go through what I experienced. And they just sometimes just shake their heads, and an example, one of the teams that I secret shopped at an event, and I went through like an hour worth of pictures. And I said, it took me an hour to get my first smile. And they just were like, all the executives sitting around a table like, "Well, what happened?" I said, "Well, you've not invited any of your staff to be part of the experience." And they, it's a good one when they write it down. I'm like, So, I had a contract in a week because I just pointed out to them what wasn't happening, that it could happen, and they could sell more tickets if they did that for their staff. They invited them to be part of the experience instead of hounding them on rules and all that. Just let them be themselves and teach them how they could be happy and smiling and stuff, and don't beat them up so much and those kind of things. So,
well, I think that's really helpful. What I'm hearing is that the people that are wanting to become professional speakers should probably imagine what it's like to be an event organizer and not have someone customize their presentation, or when the speaker says, oh, you should have me back, give them what they need in order to make that easy. So it sounds like you're standing in your ideal client. You're not making it all about you. I'm an amazing speaker, so you should, of course, hire me back. You should hire me back because your audience has asked for me to come back to talk about this thing. So I think that really helps people understand, because actually, you know what? I'm going to ask you a different question, because, and we're running out of time, but I really want to understand, like, you speak to a lot of speakers, and I'm sure that when you give them a whole bunch of advice about running it like a business, they'll then tell you how busy they are. And is it a lack of prioritization or a lack of understanding of what to spend your time doing? Like, what do you think gets in the way of most speakers turning their speaker hobby into a speaker business?
I don't think, I'll use myself as an example. I thought the speaking business was about speaking. I really thought that the majority of the business is going out and speaking. It's not. That's just this much of it. It's about getting the engagement. It's about, following up after the engagements. It's about, being kind to your clients and thinking about how you're going to reach out to people, because there's a lot of reaching out before you get that contract. And so it's about learning to network. It's about learning to be in the right place at the right time and doing the right thing, and not being upset when you don't get that first, that first contact doesn't get you the engagement. I almost said gig there, but I'm trying not to say that, because, we, in between the speakers, we talk about that, but it's not professional to say gig in between us. So I'm trying not to say it. So I just said it 3 times, but
that's okay. I think everyone will forgive you for that, considering how much value you've given them in today's. I mean, this was a wonderful interview, Ruby. I so appreciate you sharing this information with everyone, and I know you do a ton to help speakers that are just getting started and the speaker industry in general. And I want to be careful when I ask this that you don't get inundated by people asking you questions and wanting to chat. But for the people that have heard something and they may have one little question, or where would you suggest they go to find out more about what it is that you do, or where should they go to read resources that help them understand the business of speaking?
I really encourage them to check out you can get on the newsletter by going to the National Speakers Association. It's nsaspeaker.org is our website. There's a newsletter and a blog that they can sign up for that is really good. And I don't mind the questions. You can check it out on LinkedIn. That's going to be the best way to find me. And I do have one more story that I would like to share, if we can close up with that. When I first started, I watched Patricia Fripp, and I really thought that's the kind of speaker that I want to be. And there's not 2 speakers that are more different than Patricia Fripp and I, but she was perfect. And she was choreographed, orchestrated, so just amazing. And she would, tell a story over here, and she'd tell a point over here, and then center stage and her main point. And she was just perfect. So the first 5 years of my career, I was wanting to be Patricia Fripp. So I just wanted to be perfect. And I am the farthest thing from perfect ever. And one day I just I goofed something up, and I just kind of laughed at myself, and the audience laughed with me. And I'm like, well, that was kind of different. And I went home and told my husband, I'm like, that was kind of fun today. And he says, well, what happened? I'm like, I don't know. I think I let a little Ruby out. And he goes, well, let's do that more. I let a little bit more Ruby out, and I let me be the speaker. And as I did that more, I realized that that's who they want. They don't want you to be perfect. They actually, when you're more vulnerable up there and you're yourself, that's who they want. They don't want somebody fake. And the more I let myself be me, they liked me more. So when you study somebody, there's a way to study them and their craft and the way they do things. But it's okay to be yourself. Give yourself the confidence to be professional, but yet still, have your own personality. And that's what I love about you, Matthew. You are always yourself. And I adore you so much, because when I have a conversation and when I see you speak, you are who you are on stage. And I think that's one of the blessings that you show everybody, and you show your audiences. And that's That's what this is all about. This is the good speakers are who they are up there, and they have a resounding message of authenticity. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that, and the audience knows that too.
Gosh, thank you, Ruby. I appreciate that. I couldn't agree with you more. Not about your words about me. I appreciate those, but just
You can agree with me on that. It's okay.
well, I'll agree with you on that as well. So no, I mean the being your honest and true self. I feel that when I first started speaking, I made the same mistake. I tried to copy things that weren't authentically me, and I feel that there is a balance between following great ideology, great strategy for speaking, but also making sure there's a sense of you. And for me, like there are speakers, I have to bring a sense of humbleness into everything that I do because I'm honored to be able to do the stuff that I do. And there are other speakers that they bring it in their own way, but they don't show it the way I need to show it in order to show why I was so happy to be on the stage. And if I feel like if I don't do that, I ruminate that night and say I didn't give them what I felt like I needed to give them. And I think that, so I think that I don't want to belittle any of the advice you gave up till now because everything was so amazing for a new speaker. But that I would suggest the leaning into who you truly are and looking for bolting things on that are naturally you is probably the most powerful piece of advice I think any speaker should take from this. Ruby, thank you so much for doing this for all the people.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Well, look, to everyone that's listening, I so suggest that you check out the National Speakers Association. It has a ton of great resources. I'm personally a member and I wouldn't recommend it unless I was. And I would say if you're in another country, please check out and see if there's a Speakers Association where you are, because the fact of the matter is that if you really want to be in the business of speaking, you need to be around other people that actually are talking about it on a regular basis. So please, hear Ruby's words and definitely check out an association near you. But for today, thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers, everyone.
You bet. Cheers.